The Supreme Court showdown. That's exactly what this is. I am going to show you that this is going to be a very challenging decision. Regardless of which way it comes, it's going to have huge implication in terms of what's going to happen next. And then let me explain to you what is going on so that you're fully abreast of what is going on, and especially as to what the decision is going to be by the Supreme Court of the United States pertaining to whether or not the tariffs are legal or not. Now, to be clear, when we mean the tariffs, there's lots of tariffs running around. We're specifically talking about the emergency tariffs, right? Not the security-driven tariffs. That is not in the question. And they're usually really targeting, the steel and things of that nature. I think that even some of the cars, believe it or not. So you have emergency tariff and you have security tariffs having to do with the security of the United States. That, yeah, he has the ability to basically apply those tariffs. But most of them were done on an emergency basis. And that's the one that's being questioned. And these are the ones that don't look too good right now, I will say. So essentially what you have going is there's a battle, really, you may or may not realize it, playing out between the president, Congress, and the Supreme Court. We are talking about trillions of dollars, ultimately, that may or may not be able to be collected by the U.S. It's a constitutional question about executive authority. And this is where it becomes important, because essentially what the decision is going to lay on is whether or not the president of the United States has that much power. Regardless, depending on whether or not the Supreme Court decides one way or the other. Keep in mind that whatever they decide, yes, it will impact those tariffs, but it will also impact the power, the reach that the president, the executive power, has in the U.S. Remember, in the U.S., you've got three center of influence. You have the executive power that lies with the president. Then you have Congress and you have the Senate. Between the three of them, they're basically running the country. And originally, the founding fathers wanted to make sure there was a check and balance between each of them, so not one would have too much power. For example, the only Congress has the power to actually declare war, not the president. A war. I mean, and executive action is one thing. So that's why, and don't forget to join this channel, because this is going to be interesting for you to understand, to know, and to plan, because this could have huge implication going forward. Even if they say yes, and even if they say no. So let's call it the Supreme Court showdown. And it began in 2018, but it's really starting at the beginning of this year, right? Where basically the president invoked the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. That is what he used to basically tariff everyone. And the way he did it is basically saying, well, there's an emergency. The emergency at the border. There's emergency with Mexico. There's emergency with Brazil. There's emergency. So he argued that America faced an economic emergency. Now, having said that, can't blame him too much. The U.S. does face an emergency in foreign trade. There's a huge amount of imbalance. The U.S. really doesn't build anything anymore, and is highly dependent on outside countries to produce what they need, which there wasn't a big issue before, but now it's obviously becoming an issue. As you could see, China is saying, you know what? No more rare earth mineral for you. What if they do the same thing with medicine, solar panels, a bunch of other things? What are you going to do about it, right? So it is becoming an issue, and this was the idea. Well, I believe that basically they needed to do something. They needed to do something fast. They needed to do something quick. And he says, let's push this thing and see what we could do. And since really in Congress, no one is really pushing back, they kind of allowed that thing to go on. Basically said that America is facing an economic emergency, that foreign trade imbalance threatened national security, and that emergency power gave him the right to act decisively. Billions of dollars in new tariffs followed, covering everything from steel, aluminum, to electronics and clothing. And the money kept on going, and the money keeps on coming, by the way, to the tune of almost $300 billion. This is real money, because that money goes directly into the Treasury to help pay for the debt. Well, interest on the debt. So the White House basically defended these tariffs as a strategic economic defense, not a tax. They said the goal was to level the playing field, rebuild domestic manufacturing, and make America less dependent on imports. You know what? This is not such a bad thing. I mean, I wouldn't say that, well, they are wrong in doing so. No. India is doing the same thing with China. They don't want to use trade deficit with China, so they want to do the same thing. But the thing is, the way you went about it maybe was not legal. And the Court of Appeal, not too long ago, basically say, these are illegal. You do not have that kind of power. To which the president say, fine, let's go to the Supreme Court. Therefore, we are at the Supreme Court to talk about this. But major trade groups and small businesses saw it differently. They argue that tariffs were not regulatory, but revenue raising, a form of taxation that only Congress can authorize under the Constitution. Yeah, I know this is a bit complicated for some of you, but we're here to learn. We're here to understand, right? So basically, are you doing it because you want to make money, or you want to protect the country? And this is where the story turns from basically economics to law, because the Supreme Court needs to decide whether or not one way or the other. And usually they should have taken care of this next year, but obviously we need to deal with this right now. So the legal challenge, basically, you have a coalition of businesses that sued the administration in what will become Learning Resources versus Trump, and its companion case, which is VOS Election versus Trump. So basically, it's somebody brought it's a case, and the argument was simple but powerful. The president cannot use emergency powers to impose broad, ongoing tariffs that affect virtually every sector of the U.S. economy. Basically, you've got too much power. Those are major policy decisions. And under the Constitution, only Congress, not the president, has the power to tax or regulate the trade on such a humongous amount of scale. I think what has happened is they needed to do something, but do you want to wait 3 or 4 years to do a trade agreement with Canada and Mexico? Because that's how long this trade agreement takes. The U.S. does not have that kind of time, quite frankly. The U.S. only has about 5 to 6 years before it loses the battle with semiconductors. It needs 10 years to get up to speed with to be able to produce its own rare earth mineral. In the U.S. doesn't have 20 years to slowly kind of start making stuff here again, and do trade it doesn't have that kind of time. Okay? And if you see what the attitude has been of China, you could see, you should be worried about it a little bit, right? Should be worried because China said, no more rare earth mineral for you. So both the U.S. Court of International Trade and the Federal Circuit found serious problem with the tariffs, saying that this IEEPA was never meant to authorize such sweeping economic actions. Those courts held that the emergency declaration did not justify permanent tariffs. The law was being stretched beyond recognition. Well, it was stretched. Right? In fact, it was so stretched that countries were flabbergasted. Brazil said, you 50% tariffs, because you don't like what we're doing to our former president? So the final word, the final word rests now with the Supreme Court of the United States. So what is a question? Let's understand what the heck is going on. What do they want? And let's see what potentially could be the answer. Because if you want to make money in the stock market, if you want to protect yourself, you might want to decide beforehand what you think is happening. So, did the president exceed his legal authority under IEEPA? If he didn't, does that statute itself violate the separation of powers by giving too much discretion to the executive branch? So it's more than just about trade, because they said, you know what, you go ahead and do it. It's about the boundaries of presidential power, the role of Congress, the integrity of constitutional checks and balances. This is what's at stake here. So if the court rules for the president, it would mean, obviously, forget him, future president could unilaterally impose tariffs, perhaps on an entire economy without a vote on Congress. I guess we don't need Congress anymore. Well, obviously, right now, they haven't said anything. When I mean Congress, the Republicans, because they're going along literally with what the president is saying. And no one is saying boo, quite frankly. I mean, look what's happening, the Epstein case. Look what's happening with, the tariffs. Look what's happening with the closing of the government. In fact, the Democrats want to talk to Trump to stop the closing of the government, the shutdown. So if the court rules against him, it would be one of the biggest rebukes of executive economic power in modern U.S. history. Now, you're not hearing too much about it in terms of what's at stake. They're basically saying, well, they're going to decide whether or not it's okay for them, for him to, or for the U.S. government to impose such tariffs. And that's it. Well, the reason they don't want to make too much big deal about it, because this is a humongous deal, and this is a very earth-shattering deal regardless. Right? If they say no, huge rebuke for executive economic power in modern U.S. history, the largest. So how is the U.S. administration going to start negotiating with other countries when they say, we don't have the power to do this? It's going to create havoc for them to do anything at all. Okay? So the question, and underlying this, and I want you to understand these things, it's important to know, is basically what we call the major questions doctrine. That's one of the legal key principles at stake. It says when the government wants to make a decision of vast economic or political significance, Congress must clearly say so in the law. And that's when you realize, in fact, I mentioned in a previous video, there's no way they're going to say it's okay, right? Because you have to look beyond just the tariffs. You have to look at, well, then basically he could do whatever he wants. In this case, the justices are saying, did Congress really mean to give the president the power to rewrite the nation's trade policy through emergency powers? And it was a law designed for national security crisis? Unfortunately, the Chief Justice, John Roberts, who's appointed by Trump, believe it or not, questioned whether tariffs, which are essentially taxes on imports, can be imposed under an emergency law meant for sanction, not taxation. And Justice Sonia Sotomayor echoed that view, and she's on the other side. She's from the Democrat side. I say bluntly, tariffs are a form of taxation. Why should the president hold that power when the Constitution gives it to Congress? You see where it's going with this? We're going as far as do you want to give the president more power? Forget the tariffs. Think about the power. The major questions doctrine could become the decisive standard. Right? A tool for the court to say, if you want to give the president this much power, Congress must be unmistakably clear. Now, of course, you haven't heard too much from Congress for the simple reason it's led by the Republicans, and they haven't said anything really. And the Democrats are frankly all over the place. Therefore, what they're doing now to say, hey, we exist, right? So we're going to take a stand on healthcare, and we want to talk to the president. Otherwise, we're closing. Then we're closing. And obviously, the president is not listening. So running alongside the major question debates is another foundation issue, the non-delegation doctrine. This principle says that Congress cannot hand over its core powers like taxation or regulation of commerce without clear limits or guidance. You have to understand, like as I said before, the founding fathers wanted to have a check and balance. Yes, the president had lots of powers. But no, he's not a king. That's why you've got, well, don't forget, they replaced a king in the United States by a president. So they wanted to have Congress to kind of oversee what he was doing. And also on top of that, you had the Senate. 300 people, about 100 people. Kind of all these people are watching what the president is doing. So if IEEPA is interpreted to give president unlimited tariff authority, it could violate that doctrine by effectively handing over Congress' taxing power to the executive branch. This is what's happening here. This is not really about the tariffs. You are almost going to consecrate a king. Several conservative justices have signaled interest in reviving this doctrine, which has been dormant for decades. Don't forget that IEEPA is from the 70s. So that's why this case is about much more than Donald Trump. It's about whether America wants to reaffirm Congress as a primary maker of economic law or continue a trend toward presidential lawmaking by declaration. Now, you've seen, for obvious reason, that this administration, for the right reason or the wrong reason, has been pushing the envelope further and further and further. I mean, look what they've done with Venezuela. Look what they're trying to do in, I believe it's Nigeria, in an African country, where they say you're persecuting the Christians, and therefore we have something to say about that. Where the U.S. is literally going into other countries, and for the right reason or the wrong reason, literally pushing the envelope and attacking and killing people and going. Now, of course, you have to realize also that these people are not crazy. Right? The administration is not a bunch of yahoos just doing it for the sake of doing it. They realize that, listen, we're under a big duress here. We're losing ground economically. We owe $37 trillion. The U.S. is losing ground slowly. Why? While China is getting along with Russia and it's combining itself with almost India. You see all three of them? That's what's happening. Don't look at it just purely on a Donald Trump basis. Look at it as a, what's really going on to the U.S. and why are they doing, and do we need to do something very strong? So beyond the legal issues, the potential financial fallout is enormous. And I don't think the market realizes that. So analysts estimate that if the court strikes down the tariffs, say it's illegal, the U.S. government could owe up to $1 trillion in refund to importers. And don't forget, it's not like the money is going back to India or the money is going to Switzerland. No, the money is basically going to the importers. And it could be GM, it could be Ford, right? American companies, quite frankly. So this could be a big issue. Refunds of that size could shake the markets. Why? Well, because you just pocketed $300 billion. Don't forget that the U.S. deficit is about $1 trillion or so a year, and almost a third of it got just repaid because of those tariffs. And the longer you wait, the more money comes in. We're talking up to $1 trillion coming in. So that's a good thing. Kind of a tax now, isn't it? But at the end of the day, that money may not come through after all. Then what do you think happens? You have to give it back. So businesses that paid these tariffs, from retailers to manufacturers, would suddenly face new uncertainty about pricing, supply chains, and global contracts. I mean, refund of that size could shake the markets, disrupt treasury balances, and force emergency congressional action to stabilize financial fiscal policy. It's like you're going to the bank and you're going to pay for your mortgage, and then you take it back. Basically, you sell your house, you sell your house, and you pay your mortgage, and you say, oh, you know what? Never mind. I can't. I'm taking the money back. But you just sold your house. But you can't do that. Yes, I can. Right? This is a case where you were allowed to do it. Maybe you should never be allowed to do it to begin with. So meanwhile, allies and rivals alike, from China to the European Union, are watching closely. China is saying, let's see what happens. Because if he can't pull it off, he's a puppet. He lost all of his power. European Union is going to say, whoa, hold on. So you really didn't, you can't charge? And when we say we're going to give you $200 billion and we're going to invest $600 billion in the U.S., this is huge. We're going to invest lots of money in the U.S. Maybe we don't have to do it anymore because technically we don't have this over our hands. I mean, the European Union said that they were going to spend about $750 billion in buying energy from the U.S. They were going to invest $600 billion in the U.S. Japan was going to invest just almost $600 billion as well. Maybe they don't need to do that anymore. The ruling will determine whether the United States can still use tariffs as a geopolitical weapon, or whether those powers must be explicitly authorized by Congress in the future. Of course, you could have gone directly to Congress and, get that power from Congress and then do it. Why didn't they do it? Political cover. Because they say, listen, let him do it. Let him do it, right? You want us to vote on it? Because this way, if that doesn't work, as a political cover, as a Republican, you could always say, he pushed. We never got to vote on this thing. They may turn around and say, okay, fine, then you vote on it then. Thing is, do you really want to vote on something like that? Because if let's say you're a congressman, from Missouri or whatever, and you're voting to increase taxes, what are you actually doing? Increase tariffs, sorry. It's almost the same thing in the end of the day. But the point is tariffs. What are you really doing? You're basically telling if GM has a plant in Missouri that they are going to be having to pay more tariffs. That's not good for GM. They're not going to like you. Okay, never mind. Then pass the cost to the consumer. Even worse, the consumer are not going to like you. Can't you just leave it the way it is? And unfortunately, you really can't, because you need to do something to change how things are run, because right now the U.S. is running a huge trade deficit. One, it's running a huge fiscal deficit. It owes $37 trillion. So the U.S. is not making anything, just borrowing money to buy the stuff from China and India or whatever. Well, they are getting better at making the stuff until they decide to hold it against you, as they're doing. What they're doing with the rare earth mineral is very, very interesting. They said, we have the power not to give it to you unless you do something for us. What if they do other things? What if they decide other things? What are you going to do? So, future administrations from either party could weaponize tariffs in foreign policy disputes with minimal oversight. You're giving a huge amount of power to the president, but if the court rules against the president, it will send a wrong signal, the strong signal that the emergency powers cannot replace the legislative process. So how does it feel right now, right? What are the odds that this is a big deal, humongous deal? Maybe not today and also for tomorrow and the day after. Well, oral argument, the mood was tense. Observers described justices from both ideological wings expressing doubt about the administration's reasoning. I don't think they're making a case for it. Chief Justice Roberts appeared to look for a limiting principle, a way to uphold the law without granting unlimited power. They're going to have to split the baby. Justice Kavanaugh pressed the government to explain why emergency economic powers should extend to tariffs, which have historically been a congressional domain. Justice Jackson and Justice Kagan asked whether accepting the government arguments would effectively erase the distinction between economic emergency and policy disagreements. Meaning, I don't agree with the way you're treating Bolsonaro in Brazil, therefore it's 50% for you. In fact, they went to complain to the World Trade Organization, quite frankly. Brazil says this is ridiculous. Reporters described the government defense as on the defensive, trying to portray the tariffs as a regulatory measure, not a tax. But they are unconvinced. I think they're losing that battle. And just saying, well, if you don't do it, good luck. We are going to be in big trouble. Make no mistake, the Supreme Court is under tremendous pressure. I mean, the stakes are not only financial, but institutional. A ruling against the president could unleash lawsuits. I mean, imagine you're GM, right? GM took about 100, is it $1 billion or 100 million? I forgot. But they took a huge hit because they obviously importing lots of steel, which is, being taxed. 40-50%. Aluminum. Ford is the largest importer of aluminum. They're getting taxed too. So they had to pay that tax because they didn't want you to pay more for your car, hoping that, maybe this thing goes away. Now, their stock took a hit. They took a hit. And now you're saying, you know what? Never mind. Here's the money back. They could turn around and say, listen, you've been holding my money for 6 months. I want interest. Now I am going to sue the government, quite frankly, because it impacted our stock price because you did something illegal. It would be a mess. So the court is acutely aware that they sit at the center of a politically charged moment. And on top of everything else, remember, midterm elections are next year. Critics on both sides are watching closely for signs of partisanship. And yet the justices seems determined to frame this case not as a political one, but as a constitutional one. Now remember, in the U.S., the Supreme Court judges are elected for life, so they don't care. They don't need a job ever. I mean, again, the founding fathers designed it that way, so you could never influence them. So 3 outcomes. The first one is the court rules broadly against the president, striking down the tariffs and reaffirming that Congress alone controls trade taxation. Big problem. Number 2, scenario 2, the court issues a narrower decision saying that IEEPA cannot be used for this scale of tariffs, but leaving future emergency powers intact. Scenario 3, the court side with the president, upholding the tariffs and as within executive authority during declared emergency. Highly unlikely this happens. But regardless, each outcome carries profound implications for law, policy, for everything. This could be a major impact. And it's more than a courtroom drama, quite frankly. It's a constitutional stress test, one that will determine how far the presidency can stretch its power in the name of economic security. If the court rules against the president, it could restore a long-lost balance between Congress and the executive branch. Because frankly, the president's been able to do whatever he wants. If it rules in his favor, it could signal the dawn of a new era of unilateral economic authority. Don't forget, he's tearing down the White House. It's going to look better, but still you're tearing down the White House. Either way, the decision will echo for far beyond Washington. It will shape how America conducts trade, how global partners view U.S. power, and how future presidents view the tools of economic warfare. You're going to say, how the heck did we get there? Why did we put ourselves in this situation? It's like, you're a married couple, and you decide to take on another wife or another husband. And then you go on living and working, and until they say, whoa, wait a second, you can't do that. Why not? Well, because you can't do that. Wow, should have told me, but you should have started to begin with. Now you got 4 sets of kids. How are you going to manage that? Because you're going to jail. Now they all, that was illegal and blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean? The thing is, why it looks like almost there was no check and balance along the way. I mean, there were check and balance. Technically, you have Congress that's supposed to stop you. You got a bunch of other things. But it didn't work. Congress didn't say anything. The Democrats forget it. The Senate, nothing. Right? And now you are in a situation where they could pull the rug out of under you. That is major. That is a major issue, because if it doesn't work, you got to give the money back. People are going to laugh at you. So, right. Right now it looks like they are not going to approve this thing. So what does that mean? Well, the immediate and direct impact, refunds and financial liability. Businesses that paid the tariffs might be eligible to claim refunds. Some analysts estimate that if the tariffs are invalidated, the federal government could face hundreds of billions of dollars, possibly up to $750 to $1 trillion of refund. The process will be complex. Who paid the duty? What portion was on the challenge statute? And how do you claim it? Domestic industries and importers could receive cash influx from refunds, which could ripple through the supply chain and pricing. You got to wonder, but what were you thinking? Were you thinking? Well, suppose they said no. Do you realize the implication? But as a deal maker, you know what? You make a deal, and then that has been the strategy all along, right? You push them against the fact, and they said okay. And that techniques and strategy has worked, right? I mean, because they say, oh, the tariffs are going to be horrible. The countries they're going to be a tariff war. Nobody fought the tariffs, apart from China. Europe said 15%. Thank you. Mexico, thank you. Canada, well, they can't really say anything right now, because 85% of those tariffs are protected. But the point that it was working. It was working fine, because there was no really, because they could have done retaliatory tariffs, but no one really did. And on top of that, which was, incredible, foresight, is the companies themselves decided not to pass, or at least not in a major way, the cost to the consumer. It was working fine. Yeah, some people complain, and yeah, food is a little bit more expensive, but it's not like you're paying more for your car, even though GM took a huge hit in terms of paying more for steel and aluminum. Except that you did not quite get it to the end, which is you have to give the money back. And that will be there will be policy and trade disruption. The tariffs in question, right, currently underpin certain trade and diplomatic arrangement. A ruling against them would unsettle agreements built on those tariffs, right? Europe promised some money. Japan has promised some money. In fact, today, who was it? Novardisk, the pharmaceutical company, was in there saying, no, we're going to invest in the U.S., we're going to do this, we're going to do that, right? Maybe they don't do that anymore, or they just kind of not answer the phone. That could be major. Domestic industries, importers, exporters will face uncertainty. Will the tariff rates avert? Will new authority be used to impose a different tariff? What happened to supply chain planning done, assuming the tariffs are valid? The executive, legislative, legislative power is going to shift. A decision against a tariff would curtail the president's ability to unilaterally impose broad economic measures. It weakens the president. Right? So you would have major questions doctrine. It would impact the trade supply chain strategy for businesses. You would have fiscal implication. If refund liabilities materialize, there could be large impact on federal revenues, budgeting, deficit projections. Maybe that's the idea. You say, listen, you better say yes, because if you say no, you take us all down. Then you better say yes or some kind of a yes. So you need to be very, very careful, because that happens, and forget the stock market. That is a black swan. That is what we look for on this channel. And that's why I want you to subscribe, because that's what we do. We look for these things. Right? We look for these things that will impact the stock market. And this will definitely impact the stock market. And impact the bond market, because don't forget, now you cannot repay all that money, and meaning that the $3 or $1 trillion that you thought were going to come in to go towards the treasury, which means the bonds, and somehow ease the $37 trillion debt, you will not have that anymore. You will lose that, and that's a big problem. So you have to be careful. So we have to look for, look when SCOTUS, which is a Supreme Court of the United States, rules and model potentially refund volumes, timeline for claims. If tariffs are struck down, the baseline for executive tariffs risk changes. This is a problem. And of course, what if they agree with POTUS? Right? What if they agree with him? What if they agree with the administration? And they said that, he was in favor. If this one is even, it could have major implication for the nation across legal, economic, trade, foreign policy, institutional lines. Basically, if the Supreme Court say, you know what, I think he wasn't his right to do that. This would likely expand executive branch power significantly, because the president would be confirmed via the court to be able to impose tariffs, effectively taxes on imports, without needing a separate specific congressional act. That would raise separation of power questions. SCOTUS, Supreme Court, acceptance of this would reinforce a presidential authority to act on major questions without detailed congressional authorization, although he's kind of done it already. But this would weaken the major questions doctrine in favor of executive flexibility. You basically would give, and maybe I think that deep down, strategically speaking, that's what they're probably thinking of. Because if they get to do that, then we're back to the races. It would set a precedent that trade policy, which historically has been tightly linked to congressional powers, can shift more towards executive discretion. And maybe you need that. Maybe you need that to be able to face up to an emergency. The U.S. has an emergency, believe it or not. You may or may not like the president, but the U.S. has an emergency to do something very fast. Not 20 years, 6 years, 7 years max. Otherwise, you start losing the anything having to do with rare earth mineral, everything having to do with the semiconductors, healthcare. Don't forget all the medicines made overseas. It would set a precedent. It would set a precedent. The U.S. could see more frequent, broader use of tariffs as an instrument of policy. Don't forget, the next president that comes along, hey, thank you, I could have a lot more power. This could increase uncertainty for importers, exporters, supply chains. Don't forget, these people, all they want is they want to make money. They want to feed people, right? They don't want to be part of a political game, whether or not it works, it doesn't work, at least with some control, because there's no more control. Then they say, how could you do business with the U.S.? Because tariffs might be imposed quickly with less legislative process. Businesses would need to hedge for more frequent policy shift. It might trigger retaliation for trading partners if they perceive the U.S. is using tariffs too broadly. For domestic consumer and industries, increased import could translate to higher consumer price. We haven't seen it yet, but because it's building up, but eventually it's gonna have to happen. The U.S. might use tariffs more aggressively as a foreign policy tool, and right now it's using effectively because the U.S. is 25% of the GDP. So obviously they got tremendous amount of power right now, right? So U.S. trade partners may reassess agreements, renegotiate terms in light of increased U.S. unilateral flexibility. Right now, I would suggest very strongly you take a look at your portfolio, right? And you start hedging that portfolio. I don't know, buy some puts, long-dated puts. Because, I mean, no one has any idea what could happen if they say no. If they say yes, it's okay, and you're off to the races there. You're basically losing Congress. Who needs Congress anymore? Who needs a Supreme Court? You just have a president, you have a king, essentially. Right? If tariffs becomes a more significant source of revenue, the federal budget or trade policy calculation may shift. The practice of using tariff revenue as part of fiscal strategy might increase. Let's just stack those people. And of course, this at some point, it might create inflation after all. I mean, at the end of the day, the reason the country is doing well, I mean, has been doing well and has been a beacon of hope for many people is because there's a balance of power between the president, there's Congress and the Senate, they kind of have a good, but if the power reside with one person too much, if the right person, it's okay, but if it's the wrong person. So we are looking at a major issue here. This is a major issue that you need to start worrying about. The reason you need to start worrying about because we're now deciding the future of the United States. We're deciding the future of the power of the president. I know that a lot of people have been running around. He's not a king. He's not a king. If they say yes, suddenly the U.S. will have a very powerful president. Right? Was that the plan all along? Well, I mean, I'm sure got lots of lawyers, and I'm sure they kind of guess that this was going to happen, right? I mean, they know all these things ahead of time. Right? Don't forget, they're not playing checkers; they're playing chess, right? They're saying, you know what, we're going to keep doing it until somebody told us not to do it. And I was so far down the line, and you're going to say no. That's going to be a disastrous consequences. We have to be careful. We have to be acknowledging that this is going to be a problem. So, what I want you to do, obviously, join the channel because we're going to be tracking the situation very closely. We're going to try and, we're following this situation. And don't forget, there's also the situation happening with the U.S., going pretty strong with Venezuela. Not so much that they want to invade Venezuela, but they basically target practice, right? That's a problem. We're doing target practice here. We're checking things out. We're seeing what works and what doesn't work. Why is the U.S. Going to start developing, testing nuclear weapons? There's a lot of things happening. No, of course, don't forget the other guys are doing it as well. Not just the U.S. is a bunch of crazy people. No. China is doing it. Russia just developed this new ballistic weapon. I mean, it's happening. The world is becoming more and more dangerous. The world is becoming more and more focalized, and one way or the other. So we need to make sure that we understand what's happening. And that's what this channel is about, right? And I want you to subscribe and join my Patreon channel or become a member of this channel because I make recommendation based on everything that's happening. For example, what's going on with the rare earth mineral? What do we do? Do we buy? Do we sell? Do we sit on the side? What about the quantum computing? What about that? Right? Lots of opportunities right now. Not just about NVIDIA, which is overpriced. Lots of opportunity with small stocks. Opportunity with small stocks because the interest rates are going down. So therefore, you should monitor these things very, very closely. And this is what I'm here for, to help you understand what's happening, follow the situation for you, break it down in a way that everybody understands. But at the end of the day, these are important matters. We are looking for a black swan. Now, this is a major one. One way or the other. One way or the other. Keep that in mind.